Our psalm today is Psalm 43 from the Laughing Bird. Clear my name, God. Side with me against those godless tormentors. Rescue me from their lies and abuse. I trusted you to look after me, God. Why have you pushed me aside? Why are so many out to get me, making my life such a misery? Let your truth blaze like a beacon, so I can see the way to go. Let it light up the path and lead me to your home on the sacred mountain. Then I will offer myself to you in worship, God. Offer myself with uninhibited joy. I will praise you with music and song, O God, my God. Why do I feel so defeated? Why am I so anxious and agitated? I tell myself not to give up hope, for you are my God and my help, and I'll be glad of that again. Our scripture reading today is from Luke 8, verses 26 through 39, the New Revised Standard Edition. Then they arrived at the county of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes and did not live in a house but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demons into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there on the hillside a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the men and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherds saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man for whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man for whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him.
Good morning. People are funny creatures, aren't we? For those that I haven't met, my name is Joe Rogers. My training's in sociology, but I currently work for Butte County Behavioral Health as a case manager. And generally, I am interested in the how and the why people choose to act and interact with one another. Sometimes I never come up with an answer. So it is with today's scripture. Be prepared to be disappointed. This morning, we read the story of Jesus sending out demons from a man and into a herd of swine, who then ran to the lake and were drowned. So much for bringing home the bacon. We have a man who we are told had demons in him. He wore no clothes, was homeless, sheltering in the tombs in the cemetery, and we can probably guess was also more than a bit of a public nuisance to boot. It was to a point that in verse 29 that we read, for many times this man had been seized and he'd been kept under guard, so in custody, and had been bound with chains and shackles, secured and detained. We also read that he would escape or be released and return to his community to start the cycle all over again. Now Jesus had commanded the demons to come out of him, and as we'd already covered, the herd of swine, lake, drowned. So what happened then? The swineherds went and told the people in the city and the country of what they had witnessed. We don't know what happened, but it happened. The people came and found Jesus. They also found the man that had been cleansed, clothed and in his right mind. In short, ready to reconcile with his community and be a productive member of society, or at least not a burden anymore. And what was the response of this community? They asked Jesus to leave because they were afraid. They chose not to make space for Jesus. Jesus complied with their request, got back into the boat, and left. What could have been his effect in their community if they hadn't surrendered to fear? They were afraid. Fear warns us of danger, but it can be warped and become hard to control. Fear is a powerful emotion. It readies the body to retreat, to strike, or to become paralyzed. Fear can also make us irrational. If you're looking for examples of irrational, unfounded fear, just look at the news headlines, both national and international. It would take me far too long to expand on how unfounded fear has shaped our past and continues to plague our present. Fear is something that we all feel at some point or another. Generally, we humans feel some sort of fear or anxiety when we encounter something new, unusual, or beyond our ability to understand. One definition of a miracle is a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. According to our reading today, this community responded to a miracle and asked Jesus to leave because of their fear. Why? Why is that? It wasn't like Jesus had a bad reputation for being mean or anything. Well, some Pharisees and Sadducees exempt. In fact, Jesus had a pretty good reputation for not only being a great teacher, but also a great healer. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, starts with a leper who came to Jesus to be healed, and Jesus heals him. Asked him not to say anything about it either. In the same chapter, in verse 5, Jesus is approached by a Roman centurion who asked Jesus to heal his servant who was at home, paralyzed and in terrible distress. In verse 13, Jesus tells the centurion, "Go, let it be done for you according to your faith." And the servant was healed within that hour. Matthew chapter 8, verses 14. Jesus entered Peter's house and saw Peter's mother-in-law with a fever and healed her. Verse 16, they brought to him many who were possessed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and cured all who were sick. The Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 11, tells us the story of Jesus healing the blind man. Having covered his eyes in mud, he bathed at Jesus' direction, and his sight was restored. But of course, in the verses 13 through 34, the Pharisees were going to Pharisee. They were calling out the healing as it occurred on the Sabbath, questioning the identity of the man healed. Is he or isn't he the same person? Even questioning, harassing the man's parents. See, the Pharisees were also afraid of losing their power, their prestige, their command over people. Very afraid. But let's get back to our scripture this morning. One of the things that struck me is how much demonic possession reminds me of many of the symptoms of certain severe mental health disorders. It has long been my thought that demonic possession was a way of understanding mental illness from a historical perspective. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, serious mental illness is defined as a mental behavioral or emotional disorder resulting in serious functional impairment, which substantially interferes with or limits one or more of major life activities. That's the textbook definition. Let's check it against our scripture. For a long time, he had worn no clothes. Check. He did not live in a house, but in the tombs. Check. For many times it had seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. Check. For those of us who work in behavioral health, these symptoms are highly relevant. We see them every week in our parks, on our streets, and in the alleys in between. Our first responders, those police departments, those emergency medical technicians, those firefighters, those sheriff's deputies, also bear witness to the severe mental illnesses of so many of our unsheltered neighbors. Some would ask, why don't we also keep under guard and bound with chains and shackles our folks with severe mental illness? Sometimes we do, though it is only under the very strict guidelines of the California Welfare and Institution Codes, beginning with 5150. For those of you who don't know, that's that 72-hour involuntary hold. It is not an easy determination to make. The reason for strict guidelines and the reason that folks like me every 2 years are recertified is for one very simple fact. These folks are still adults whose civil rights are fully intact. Yet, irrational, unfounded fear takes hold. Many folks in our community would have those with a serious mental illness locked away. Jesse is fond of saying, God is reconciling the world to God through Jesus Christ. One of our goals at Behavioral Health is to rehabilitate those with mental illness, to be able to maintain stably in the community. This can include medication support, intensive case management, that's what I do, and connection to support services. We are, in essence, attempting to reconcile those with serious mental illness with the community. But let's be honest, none of us would turn away Jesus or those that help heal and reconcile mentally ill folks from the community, would we? Would we? Let's talk about Safe Space. Safe Space, for those who don't know, operates a rotating winter shelter for those that are unhoused. One of the things they require is a check-in site to be able to meet with potential guests and take them to the shelter site to settle in for the night. A while ago, Safe Space was able to lease the old 7-Eleven building at First and Main. It seemed ideal. Walking distance of the downtown plaza, on-3 bus routes, off-street parking, adequate power, storage. Yet complaints arose about too many unsheltered people, some with serious mental illness, coming to the downtown area. Seriously? Oh, there were the technical issues raised about appropriate permits, traffic issues, and a whole host of other details. The reality is that the Safe Space check-in site was always, in my recollection, adjacent to the downtown core. For example, that season, Safe Space ended up holding their check-in site under a tent in the parking lot of Trinity United Methodist Church. Seems to me it was still adjacent to downtown. Happily, Safe Space has new home on the Esplanade, where they can do check-ins and now offer some daytime programming, a home that is a little more difficult for some people to access. Then there's the Torres Community Shelter on the south end of town. When I worked there wasn't a week that went by that we didn't get a call complaining about a person who may or may not have been staying at the shelter. It didn't matter. The shelter got the blame. Seems that folks assume someone with a severe mental illness is dangerous without knowing them at all. Talk about unfounded fear. For those that don't know, Torres is now open 24 hours a day, except for a half day on Fridays. They got to do the deep cleaning, floors, and all that kind of stuff. They are also low barrier now, allowing to space to be able to better serve those with serious mental illnesses, along with those who suffer from addiction issues. Also, the Genesis Pallet Shelter site, which is around the corner from Torres Shelter, had similar barriers placed in their way. Fortunately for the Genesis Shelter, it had been mandated by court order and not the city's compassion. However, the one that still stings the most is the now defunct Orange Street Shelter. If you've never heard of it, that's not surprising to me. It was to have been a collaboration between the Jesus Center and Safe Space. It was to have been a low-barrier shelter of around 200 beds, offering on-site amenities, showers, meals, and space for service providers such as behavioral health to connect the guests of that shelter to services meant to address and overcome the barriers of homelessness and to be reconciled with the community. But it never came to happen. Why was that? Unfounded fear. On April 11th, 2019, the California State University Chico Office of the President under Gail Hutchinson issued a statement regarding the Orange Street shelter. I want to point out, so as not to be misleading, that first of all, President Hutchinson was a person that I studied under as Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. I knew her, I respect her. She's an ally. However, I also want to make certain that we understand something from her statement was that she acknowledged that there is great need for such a shelter in Chico. However, that NIMBY fear, because keep in mind, Orange Street was to be at 4th and Orange, ironically, just across the train tracks from Depot Park. In her statement, she wrote, although our students are young adults, for many, their initial years on our campus are the first ones lived many miles away from home. To bring a vulnerable population such as those who will be the primary clients of the low barrier shelter into close proximity to student housing and other campus facilities is to introduce an element over which both our campus and our city can exercise limited control. Seriously, limited control. That's what we've had always, anyways. But I have to wonder, as opposed to what? As opposed to the several bars in the vicinity that get out of control on weekend nights? As opposed to the several unrecognized fraternities and sororities on the South Campus area who the university also has limited control over? Some of which are non-compliant with university rules, had or has had issues with hazing, and a few whose national headquarters, were the ones to revoke their local charters. I suppose that those situations are better than seeing folks working to try to better themselves. I would, however, like to know where these young adults have lived that didn't have unsheltered or people with serious mental illnesses. Something else to think about, as the Chico State and Statement notes, it is the very nature of a low barrier shelter that causes our greatest concern. And yet, this greatest concern led us to one of the city's most incredibly expensive lawsuits, ones that we are still bound by for another 2 years. So let us take a few moments to give thanks for those service providers who do the work, who work with those like the man in our scripture. We're talking folks like Lisa Courier's Crisis Care Triage and Advocacy Program, the Genesis Pallet Shelter, the North State Shelter Team, Safe Space Winter Shelter, and the Torres Community Shelter. It wouldn't be me if I didn't leave you with some quote or reference from science fiction or fantasy, so let me leave you with this, a quote from Elizabeth Haydn's fantasy novel, Requiem for the Sun. Perhaps that is what all a miracle is, faith and the knowledge of what is right in combination with a refusal to be deterred. Thank you.